should go to Zimbabwe. It is the land Kevin,
The Paleozoic Era, an in-depth look. The Paleozoic was one of the most influential eras. It was the first era within the Phanerozoic eon, the eon of visible life. The era was full of trial and error when it came to evolution. Later, these adapted creatures moved onto land and became the first animal inhabitants of the ever-changing continents of the globe. The early Paleozoic saw many continents cluster around the equator, as well as a sizable chunk in the south. Later, during the mid to late Paleozoic, the continent of Gondwana was torn into pieces that merged into Euramerica. Meanwhile, other bits and pieces were colliding with Laurasia. By the Permian period, Siberia and China, as well as many other islands and such, were merged into the huge landmasses. These formed Pangaea, the supercontinent. This landmass encompassed almost all of the land at the time, which was around 250 million years ago in the Permian period. The massive ocean that surrounded Pangaea was fittingly named Panthalassa. The climate during the Cambrian period was moderate at first, but over the course of the Cambrian it became considerably warmer and led to the second greatest sea level rise in the Phanerozoic eon. The early Paleozoic ended with a short but devastating late Ordovician ice age. This sudden and dramatic change of temperature led to the second greatest mass extinction of the eon. The ice age also allowed for the creation of glaciers that drowned out a large portion of the ocean. When Pangaea was formed, its center was very dry and devoid of vegetation. This was because its hugeness prevented rain clouds from floating far beyond the supercontinent's coasts. The first major event of the Paleozoic was the Cambrian explosion. This influential moment was when the evolution of very basic sea creatures was started off. In the Cambrian explosion, arthropods and chordates were created. Arthropods were the ancestors of modern crustaceans and insects, while chordates were the creatures with rudimentary spinal cords. Already stated was the late Ordovician Ice Age. This event led to the rapid global cooling as an ice age set in. This led to the formation of glaciers and the lowering of sea level. Also, this cold spell led to the second greatest mass extinction of the Phanerozoic eon. The Silurian period, which lasted from 443 million years ago to 416 million years ago, saw one of the most influential moments in global history, the time when the first sea creatures moved to the land. The final period of the Paleozoic era, the Permian period, saw the formation of Pangaea, a supercontinent that made up almost all of the Earth's landmass. It was surrounded by Panthalassa, the single ocean of the time. Pangaea would stay intact until the next era. The end of the Paleozoic was marked with a large extinction that wiped out around 50% of all animal families and 95% of all marine species. This was due to glaciation or volcanism. It is not known which it is. The Paleozoic era underwent many changes that affected its inhabitants. The first creatures were the chordates and arthropods. These were very simple creatures that were formed during the Cambrian explosion. These creatures would later evolve into other sea creatures. The 45 million year long Ordovician period came after the Cambrian. It was known for having many small marine invertebrates. The most famous of these was the trilobite, an armored arthropod that scurried around the bottom of the ocean for 270 million years before it went extinct. After the fall of the Ordovician, there was the Silurian period. Here there were jawless fish, mollusks, and coral. These were nothing, though, compared to the incredible discovery of land beings. This was the period when plants evolved. They had no leaves yet. Later in the Devonian period, ferns and trees appeared, as well as advancement in land life. At this time, the first vertebrates were colonizing the land. They were called the tetrapods. They were all quite different. Some looked like snakes and some looked like lizards. Some were 4 inches and some were 16 feet. These creatures were changing. At the end of the era, amphibians and reptiles reign supreme and gymnosperms dominate plant life. Bugs exist, and phytoplankton as well as plants oxygenate the world's atmosphere to modern levels. Most creatures have gone extinct, as well as the end of the Permian period. The main and most obvious way the creatures of this era changed were as some of them moved to the land, which by then was rich and fruitful. These creatures changed in many ways as well. They adopted many different ways of existing in the water. They changed from basically being slugs to many types of radically different beings. These creatures evolved a lot over the Paleozoic era. There are many reasons for evolution. These animals were adapting to their environments and attempting to dominate the others. An interesting theory for why some creatures might have moved to the land is that their eyes would have been worth more. The bigger the eye, the farther you can see, but this is skewed very much in the murky seas. It's much easier to see through air, even when you're looking through clear water. On land, their bigger eyes could see farther and could be much more of an advantage than the depth of the ocean. Notice how deep-sea creatures of the modern day have no eyes for the most part. It's too dark and murky for them to be of any use. The Paleozoic era was a very influential step in global history and progress. It is a stepping stone from basic beings to the dinosaurs and later complex life of newer eras. This era was filled with constant change, may it be climate, geography, or evolution. The Paleozoic era was incredibly influential. Venus, the second planet from the Sun. This video will go into detail about this interesting planet. Venus is an inner planet. It's one of the planets within the asteroid belt. It's also a rocky planet, also known as a terrestrial planet. It's also not a dwarf planet. Venus, as well as Mercury, are the only planets that aren't dwarf planets that have no moons. It also has a very thick atmosphere made of 96% carbon dioxide. Named after the Roman goddess of love and beauty, Venus is the second largest terrestrial planet and is sometimes referred to as Earth's sister planet due to the similar size and mass. The surface of the planet is obscured by an opaque layer of clouds made of sulfuric acid. Also, the first flyby mission of Venus was in 1962 with the United States. The first person to discover Venus was Galileo Galilei in 1610. Venus's surface gravity is 8.87, and the distance from the Sun is 0.723 AUs, astronomic unit. It takes Venus 243 Earth days to spin on its axis one time. It takes Venus 224.7 Earth days to spin around the Sun one time. Also, it's nearly as big as the Earth, making it its sister planet. It also spins in the opposite direction around its axis. Scientists think that it could be because an asteroid hit it or something in its past. To conclude, Venus is a very interesting planet with a very interesting history.